really excited to have everybody on our first Friday office hours. So we are just going to have fun and talk about all things horticulture here on this wintry, very wintry day, but we're going to think about spring. I'm Natalie Bumgarner. I'm coming to you from Knoxville.
I'm Celeste Scott. I'm a horticulture agent in Madison County over in the Western region.
Greg Church, UT Extension over in Cumberland County.
Lucas Holman over in Wilson County.
I'm Evangeline James in Bradley County.
Melody Rose up in Greene County.
I'm Mitchell Moat in Rutherford County.
I'm Seth Wiles in Anderson County.
Awesome. So that was a good setup. We're going to call this group our panelists for this session. And you'll see as we go through the year, we're going to have 4 of these First Friday office hours, kind of trying to do them quarterly. And you may see the panelists, rotate out for each of those sessions. And so what we've tried to do is pull in a few agents who, have real expertise in specific areas. And we are going to break up kind of the session. Well, we're all staying together, but we're breaking up the morning into 4 separate sessions. So we're going to spend about 15 minutes on fruit questions, 15 minutes on some vegetable topics, 15 on ornamental, and 15 on turf. And so we're just looking forward to having a good time. We actually had a few topics pre-prepared for this very first session because we opened up that question portal just about a week ago, and when we wanted to make sure that we'd have enough information to talk with. But you guys have done a great job sending in questions already. And so I just want to encourage you to anytime something pops into your head and you think that would be a good thing for us to cover on our First Friday office hours, just go to uthort.com. On the home page, scroll to the very bottom, and there's you'll see right at the middle of the page, it's like a question portal, and you just click on that. It comes up, it's a Google form, and you just type in what your question is, and then it'll come right to us, and we can divvy those out and try to get everything addressed. But just thought this would be a really fun, interactive way for us to learn and get together, and it's looking like it's going to shape up to be pretty good. So with no further ado, I'm going to just kind of hand this off to our fruit folks. We're going to start with fruits this morning. We've got Greg Upchurch and Seth Whitehouse are going to kind of lead our conversations on that. They have a few topic areas that they're going to go ahead and let us know about, things that are, timely for this time of year. And keep in mind, we're not going to meet again until June. So even if it's something that you shouldn't be doing right now, we may introduce things that you should do in April or May. Does that make sense? All right, I'm passing it off.
Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody in here, and as somebody who really kind of enjoys the fruit side and the home fruit production type deal, right now is really kind of approaching that critical time for us to begin our home fruit production type practices. So if you've got apple trees and pear trees, you probably have already started pruning, and if you hadn't started pruning on those, you probably need to be getting those pruning shears out and start getting busy. Now, obviously, if you've just got a few trees, you can wait a little bit later into this month. But if you've probably got a bunch of trees, you're going to need to get started on those to get those projects behind you before we start seeing a lot of growth on those trees. And so get your apple trees or pear trees, your peach trees pruned here early. For on your grapes, you still have some time to wait on those grapes. And a lot of times, one of the biggest things that I see people, they try to prune real early with those grapes because they don't want to see those grapes weeping. But actually, that weeping of those grapes is really not going to cause that much of an issue. And I like to tend to prune a little bit later in the growing season before the buds really get set on those, just from a standpoint of getting a little bit more frost protection on those. So we had a question come up there about the scion. You need to get that harvested right now. If you're wanting to do some grafting, I hope you ordered your rootstock last fall and have that coming in, because if you're going to try and get rootstock right now, you're probably going to be really disappointed unless you go out and dig up a crabapple tree or something like that that you're trying to graft onto. But commercial rootstock that you're going to get, probably going to have had that purchased this past fall, because that's something that really you order late summer, early fall to make certain that you can get that. Now, I know UT Extension from time to time, various counties will have rootstock that they've ordered, or there's different grafting programs that are going on. But if you're wanting to do your own grafting and pruning, get that scion harvested now, put that stuff in the freezer, or not freezer, but refrigerator, keep it cool until you have an opportunity to kind of graft that material on. One of the questions I think we had that came in prior to this program was one about grapes and planting and growing grapes. There's two rules of thought on that. One, if you're kind of really wanting to ramp that up and get started this spring, you need to get those grape varieties ordered, but you're actually not going to plant those grapes until we get on in after the frost period is when I would actually be putting those into the ground and planting those a little bit later. Now, probably the biggest problem that I see homeowners make is that they're really excited about planting. They're all about the plants and getting it in the ground and getting started. But have you done your homework in terms of getting your site prepared? And I know maybe one of the biggest disappointments that we see with any type of planting is people are too quick to get those plants in the ground, and they really don't have the pH where it needs to be. They don't have the other nutrient levels where they need to be. They don't have their trellis system in place to be planting these, or they didn't do their homework on what varieties that they needed to be planting. Again, fruit crops are a very long-term project. It's not you plant them this year and next year, if you don't want to do it, that's fine. You know, this is over the long haul that you're going to be involved in fruit production. So you need to do that homework. You need to get that site prep done generally a year in advance before you ever even really start getting those plants in the ground.
Hey, Greg, while you're on that topic of amendments and site prep, we actually had a question that was about good amendments for planting blueberries. And so I guess I kind of read that in two ways. One may be what might be some good organic matter options that could go in prior to planting blueberries. I like composted pine bark because it increases that particle size, so it can increase drainage, but maybe even also some elemental sulfur in terms of adjusting the pH. So that was one.
Excellent question. So blueberries are one of those, it's different from the other fruit crops because it really likes that low pH, that more acidic type soils. You're looking at a plant that thrives better in a 5.2, 5.0, 4.8 pH, as opposed to other plants that like it up 6, 6.5. And so well in advance, you need to be thinking about getting that site prepared, because with blueberries, they're sensitive enough. If that environment is not right, they're not only probably not going to grow or do very well, but that they may actually die. And so we want that soil really acidic. Now, here on the plateau where I live, our soils are naturally acidic, and so they're a little bit easier to amend. However, here just this week, I was down teaching to one of Lucas's classes over in Lebanon, where their soil pHs are really high. And I'm here to tell you, if you're going to grow blueberries in that area, you better start well in advance, lowering that pH, because that soil pH is going to tend to try and gravitate back up to where it was. And so adding that pine bark, adding different compost, because blueberries ultimately, they like very high organic soils. They like very acidic type soils. They love moisture, but they cannot stand to be in wet feet. And so if you plant blueberries in a site where the water's not going to drain off, it's going to stand in that soil profile, you're really going to have a lot of problems. So you want a lot of good drainage, and that organic matter is going to improve the tilth. The looseness of that soil is going to allow water to drain through that soil. But a lot of times we like to plant those blueberries up more in berms, raised berms. If you look at a lot of commercial blueberry operations, they'll really put them up, irrigate them to where they can get plenty of water, but any of that excess water gets away. So excellent question. I would tell you, spend your time. That's one of those, do your homework. Don't get so excited to put plants in the ground, and we want you planting, but we also want you taking the time to do your research, and we want you to be successful with that home fruit planting.
And so, Greg, one other note on that, when we talk about preparing, doing your homework, when folks are looking to purchase their blueberries or other trees, is comparing the bare root versus the container plants. And that's something that a lot of people may ask questions when they go to our retail store or whatnot. And just to give a comparison of those two, when we say container, those trees are available whether in the amended soil or in another planting or potting media. And sometimes you'll even find balled and burlap, but mainly for fruit trees, that's not going to be available. So just something to think about. And so just some pros between the container plants. They might have an easier planting window, maybe a little bit older trees available, could serve as a little bit more hardiness when we're planting. And just might just simpler be easier to plant. Not as preparing and digging those holes if you're putting a long row of those trees there. But there are some cons with these container trees that you might be purchasing from retail stores. And the first one I'm going to say is it's always a higher price for doing those containers. Sometimes those roots could come with issues if they weren't at a reputable source. And we'll talk about where to find and source some of these fruit trees. And sometimes these roots can be girdling themselves or circling. So be sure when we're purchasing these container plants, we're actually looking at the roots, seeing that nice clear, Melody, you got to raise your hand. Nice clear roots there as well. So another con for some of these container plants is, some varieties that we're looking at, in our publication that Celeste just put on this chat here. We might not be able to find the right varieties, the right rootstock combinations that we really want on these containers. So we might be limited there. Sometimes they can be more difficult to establish in the surrounding soil where we kind of get a root bound, where, those roots were so used to that amended soil in that container. And now we're saying, hey, good luck in the native soil. So that's why we get back to what Greg was talking about, preparing that site, setting it up for success, so we don't have any transplant shock. So that's, kind of pros and cons of these container plants. But, one other thing I want you guys to do research on are bare root trees or bare root plants. And so that's exactly what it sounds like. These trees are, usually dug and stored without any soil around their roots. So, they're dormant and really need to be planted mostly in that early spring period. And, they can actually establish in that native soil. And that transplant shock might not be as much of an issue. So pros of these bare roots, much lower cost. Maybe you can purchase more fruit trees with that budget. It could be easier to prune instead of a scaffold early on in the establishment of that tree, which can be critical as we get older and older with that tree's age there for fruit production. And that's our ultimate goal. So another one is, this might sound kind of contradictory, but actually we could have more root mass. And so we can have upwards of twice as many roots than container plants, depending on the history of that nursery and the reputable nursery that we purchased from. One con of bare roots, once you receive them, no fiddle farting. You got to get them in the ground. That planting window, we're on a time crunch. We need to get those in the ground within a week or so. If that root mass is allowed to dry out, or left exposed to the elements, we could have higher mortality rates there. So got to get those in within a week or so. only time to plant these bare roots, you know, preferably in that springtime. We might get away with a good mid-fall planting if we're allowed with big soil moisture. So be considerate of that when you're doing your homework. And it can be difficult to find these bare roots at a retail store. So a lot of times people ask where we can get these varieties in a bare root. And we do have a link here. I will put in the chat as well, where you can actually find a lot of these fruit suppliers to purchase from. So just do your homework there, and we'll start going on through some questions. Greg, did I miss anything on the comparison between those two there?
Okay, couple other, Celeste, you want to say something there?
Yes. So before we moved over to veggies, I wanted to make sure that we addressed, we've had a question come in the question portal and in the chat about pruning figs. And so I know that's kind of considered a specialty, type kind of fruit. It's not really in our realm of what we are generally talking about with the blueberries, peaches, apples. So what are you guys' thoughts on timing of pruning fig trees? I think in this particular situation, it's I don't want to say overgrown, I mean, it's big and they need it smaller so that they can harvest it. So any thoughts on that? Sounds like it's going to be a severe pruning.
For the longest time here on the plateau, we saw no fig trees being produced here in this part of the world. Starting to see a few more hardier varieties that are starting to show up in people pruning. So with pruning plants, that's a process that starts at day one when you put it in the ground in terms of pruning and training. I don't want to ever encourage somebody to put them in the ground and then wait till they get overgrown and then figure out how to prune them back. So it's all a part of that homework process and starting at day one and training those buds. Now, generally in terms of pruning, we want to try and prune as late that we can prune on any type of fruit tree before we really get that bud development set. That'll give us a little bit more frost protection on those plantings if we prune a little bit later from that standpoint. But again, the whole premise of pruning is opening that canopy up for sunlight, getting more air movement through that tree, getting out those diseased plants, and remembering that on fruit crops, we don't want every single bud on that tree actually to live and produce fruit. We want fewer buds, fewer fruit, bigger, healthier fruit from a plant growth standpoint and health standpoint, but also from a fruit quality standpoint. One thing, and I know we're going to run out of time here in just a second, have to change to the next one. The last thing that I would say regarding fruit, spray schedule, spray schedule, spray schedule, spray schedule. Whether you're going to use organic pesticides or you're going to use traditional pesticides, that dormant oil spray may be the most important spray that you put on your fruit crop this year. Getting early control on pests, getting an early start on some of those disease. And certainly if you go to our home fruit tree spray schedule, it's a great publication. Dr. Baumgartner's edited that program. There's pictures of the different buds, what bud development is on those bloom stages, so you know kind of the period. That early, the dormant spray up to we start really getting bloom is a ultra critical time to get a hold of disease pressures that if you don't get control of them, then you're probably not going to get control of them throughout that entire growing season. So right now, prune, get on your spray schedule here early in the season.
That wraps things up for us today. I've had a great time. I think this is a really great first session, and I hope that you all keep going to uthort.com and using those resources and submitting questions into the question portal. And finally, sharing this awesome program with your friends. This is open, and we want everyone in the public who's interested in horticulture to be able to have opportunity to hop on and join us in these. We are going to post the recordings on our UT Hort Facebook page here in the near future, and we are going to get a document out to everybody who attended today.
We're going to try to be podcast cool. We're going to try to come up with like a show notes that has the link.
Yes,
Go
show
ahead.
notes. So that's going to be a fun thing. So don't worry if there were links in the chat that you didn't get to. We're going to supply those to you. Here coming up. So thanks again for attending. Natalie, any closing comment?
But thanks so much for hanging out with us and trying this new format. We've had fun, and we'll see y'all before too long. Happy gardening.